Right. Well, let me say that we are continuing the theme, actually, of our Shabbat service last night. This dilemma of Jacob, the dilemma of you and I, the dilemma of the world, between fear of being killed or protecting our own lives and the terrifying moral distress of having to kill another human being. It's a terrible dilemma. And if you were watching any of the news programs last night, CNN or anything, you'll see that there are all of these cases in America of a young man who had a gun. So he defended himself, he said, but he killed 2 or 3 other people who also had weapons. And so it goes on ad infinitum. So this is why I could have chosen to take any other message out of this parasha, but I'd rather start with what really confronts you and I as dilemmas when we, and you could see the remarks of Hilda and Uta, that we have our own dilemmas, that people don't agree on how to approach any situation today, and particularly those when it's 2 countries involved or 2 political parties involved. So what I'm sharing with today, I have gone back as rabbis and people have for centuries, but this time I've gone back to a couple of rabbis and people in our own era. And I'm going to be sharing with you, of course, I think the greatest rabbinical sage of our era, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, but also a little bit from 2 wonderful rabbis in our stream, and as a conclusion. But let's start. From the beginning to the end, Genesis chapter 34 tells a terrifying story of Dinah, Jacob's daughter, as we said, the only Jewish daughter ever to be mentioned of the patriarchs. So we've heard that Jacob learns from his sons about the capture of Dinah, and the sons immediately deciding to rescue her. It's practically an impossible assignment. They're against a whole tribe, and here they are 2 sons. Even with all the sons of Jacob, they couldn't do it. Now, so Shimon and Levi decide to rescue Dinah. Now, we're going to be confronted with the motives of Shimon and Levi. Of course, you would want to rescue one of your family members. Look at the horrific hijackings that are happening right now in our country. It is heartbreaking. And of course, as Jacob, we would want as little collateral, as little deaths, and as little hurt as possible to everyone. But what happened? What happened is that the 2 sons, Simon and Levi, decided on a total and utter deception and ruse. And it's interesting, if we were to read the Torah portion in Hebrew, the Torah uses the same word for deception or deceit as they used when they were describing what Jacob did to get the blessing and deceived his father. But before we jump to our own conclusions, let's try and understand what the Torah is trying to tell us as well. So, as we know, all the male members of the town were to be circumcised. Now, the entire town agreed to this. In other words, the entire town agreed to join the nation of Jacob, the Jewish people, to share everything, to be one. And what did the sons do? They waited after the circumcision till the 3rd day, excuse me, when the men would be most acutely in pain, and they went into the town and they killed the entire male population. They rescue Dinah, and bring her home. The other remaining brothers, remember, these are the tribes of the children of Israel. The other remaining brothers then go and steal everything in the town, plunder everything, kill everyone else. Now, this is what is crucial. Jacob is horrified by their actions. You heard me read it. You have made me odious to the people of the land, he says. What were we supposed to do? Asked the two brothers. Should we have left our sister to be like a prostitute? This is how this episode ends. The Torah leaves it up to us to decide. As a Jewish nation, our Hashem and Torah does not demand blind faith. It wants us to question, because the world is a complicated place. There's no 100% right and 100% wrong. Yes, that's what the extremes of religion, the extremes of politics want us to believe. Too easy. It's not the case. Jacob's horror at the actions of his son, however, doesn't end with their question. By the way, do you think she was treated as a prostitute? You see, I chose to read parts of this parasha to give you another take from the Hebrew words itself on how many rather orthodox, I don't want to even hurt the word orthodox, but extreme people, nationalist-minded, interpret this. But the truth is, it doesn't end there, because this is what Jacob does on his deathbed. And I want you to see the human being that is Jacob. And this is what he does. He curses Simeon and Levi on his deathbed. Their swords are weapons of violence. Let me not enter their council. Let me not join their assembly. For they have killed men in their anger and hamstrung oxen, even the cattle, as they pleased. Cursed be their anger so fierce and their fury so cruel. I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel. We're going to get to that when we get to Genesis 49. Now, this story of Dinah is an extraordinary passage. It seems to lack any clear moral message. No one comes out well. Shechem, the prince, everyone, the brothers, no one seems to come out well. Even Jacob himself, why doesn't he try and change the sons' minds? So all of this debate of this chapter goes back to the Middle Ages and is continuing today. Today you will see that debate between the extreme right and left in any country politically. You will see that debate going on between people like you and I, arguing right and left, who was right. Let's have a look at the debate of Maimonides, and this is going to surprise you folks. Two of the greatest rabbis in the Middle Ages, Maimonides, to my shock and surprise, but then you see, I think like the other side, both sides have a point, takes the side of Shimon and Levi. He says they were justified in what he did. The other men, and the worst part of all, as well as we understand today of collateral damage, not only did they kill Hashem, they killed all the men as though they personally had abducted Dinah as well. Okay, Maimonides justifies this. And he says the other members of the town saw what Shechem done, knew he was guilty of a crime, and yet they neither brought him to court nor rescued the girl. Okay, that's still very current today. They were therefore accomplices in his guilt. We even see this in our judiciary system. What Shechem had done was a capital crime in those days, and by sheltering him, the town people therefore were implicated. So Now, interesting, another rabbi, another sage that we don't hear that much about, called Nahimades, Nahmanides, disagreed totally. And this, you see, my friends, is the heart of the Jewish religion. Because by disagreeing, perhaps we'll come to an understanding between the extremes that can help humanity, as we are seeing today the world unfolding in a coalition government and other areas. Now, Nahmanides said, the principle of collective responsibility does not apply to non-Jewish societies. Now, that's another argument, because in Judaism, all Israel is responsible one for the other. He says the Noahide covenant requires every society to decide it on its own. So the debate continues to this day. Anyway, however, let's leave that aside, because we can spend many discussions. Two people today, in fact, Meyer Sternberg argues that the text is critical of Jacob for his inaction and his criticism, whereas another scholar, Samet, sees the chief culprits as Shechem and Hamor. So there is a million different opinions. Let's rather look at the text. Why does our Hebrew text deliberately deepens the moral ambiguity by refusing to portray even the villains in a bad light? Look, I read to you, Shechem loved Dinah. He wanted her. They agreed to join us. They agreed to everything. So, why? It's very perplexing. So, we can see, if we compare this with a description, for example, of the son of King David, Amnon, who raped his half-sister Tamar, that was a tale of bloody revenge. Very simple. But after that, Amnon even says he hated the woman he raped. Here was this poor Shechem who loved Dinah that he captured. Not only does the text demonize, not only does the text not demonize the people of Shechem, it also does not paint any of Jacob's family in a positive light. And as I said before, it uses the same word deceit for Shimon and Levi that it used for Jacob taking Esau's blessing. Anyway, so on and so forth. Let us see the conclusion of the great thinkers of today. The overall effect is a story that there are, ladies and gentlemen, listen to me, there are no irredeemable villains and there are no stainless heroes. In our Jewish religion, we understand that God has to use humanity, human beings, with our fears, with our complexes, with our funny conditioning, whatever it may be. But he's got to use us to be the heroes. And you can see this today when people now, and Uta, this goes to our conversation last night, where people don't want to see anything good, for example, about F.W. de Klerk. And there indeed was a lot of bad, but he did do good as well. And the same can apply to Mandela. How many of young people today say he was a sellout? Because we are mesmerized by something that doesn't exist. The perfect hero, the perfect person who never does anything wrong, or the absolute evil like Hitler. Absolute evil does exist because he had gone beyond having any conscience or listening to any voice of Hashem inside him. His conditioning was so that he crossed the red line into evil. But the people we're talking about are human beings. Baruch Hashem, like you and I, struggling to find which is the right way, making mistakes, maybe terrible things, but never giving up the struggle, listening to that voice inside which says, what is the right thing to do? So Torah means teaching, instructions, guidance. It doesn't mean me or anyone telling you exactly what to do. That is not the Jewish way. Yes, there is an extreme religious sect in Judaism who take from Torah what they want and demand that as their only way of life, and they have a good right to be there. And then there's the extreme, Baruch Hashem, like Ben Gurion, who was secular, who saw this as a historic document. But both have a choice of what they read out of the Torah. And this is what is important. And ultimately, we must ask ourselves one question, which we know that all the parts of Torah, all the parts of our Shabbat service, all the parts of our debate, all the Zooms we listen to, the Torah says there's only one path, and that path must lead to peace and the least death and violence on all sides in the context of protecting ourselves. We know, but we must still have compassion even for the enemy. This is why we know as Jews, we are not allowed to cry when our enemy, we are not allowed to rejoice, we must cry when our enemy is killed, even to protect ourselves, even to protect humanity, because every man's death diminishes me. Whereas in the extreme, maybe I hate to tell you, even in extreme Judaism, in ultra Orthodox, in one of those extreme sects, as in extreme Islam, they rejoice at death of the enemy. It's not the right way. So let us conclude here with the words of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. And then I'd like to share the words of you of two of our current rabbis today. So Rabbi Sacks says, Jacob was very afraid and distressed, afraid lest he be killed, distressed lest he is forced to kill. What the episode of Dinah tells us is not that Jacob or Shimon or Levi were right, but rather that there can be situations in which there is no right course of action, where whatever you do is wrong. And therefore, the only option to understand is to look for the path of least death, of least evil, of more respect for the other. So, let us conclude here. He says, in our universe, we have a system of competing societies. In every organization, there is a system of competition, whether it's in our religion, in our shul, in our politics. Competition, like everything in life, is good because it spurs us on. And like everything in life, it is bad if it is used only for one's own interests and not for the interests of all. One single act of violence against Dinah forced two of Jacob's sons into a violent reprisal. They chose it. And in the end, everyone was contaminated or dead. It is indicative of the moral depth of the Torah that it does not hide this terrible truth from us by depicting only one side as guilty and other as innocence. The guilt is the reaction of violence too quickly, or not soon enough, as in the case of the world reacting to Hitler and the Jews, which started the progress of 6 million people turning into 20 million people when the world went to war. Violence, whenever it is chosen out of anger or fury, worsens us worsens the other and worsens all. And now I'd just like to conclude with the words of two of our rabbis, Rabbi David Wolpe. He's the rabbi of Sinai Temple in the USA. He says we must understand in Judaism that in the Jewish religion, the pauses we have, these Shabbat services, the Haftarah, whatever it is we pause when we say perhaps a daily prayer ourselves. Those pauses are put into the Jewish religion to give us time to reflect on our souls, on our behavior, how we're treating each other, how we're defending a position that we hold in the wider world. Without time to reflect, we are usually led astray and cannot break the bondage of what we call the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, which usually comes when we're angry or upset or defending ourselves against someone else. We jump to the wrong conclusion with our words. So often, Rabbi Wolpe says, after we have lost our anger or said something we shouldn't have, we wish we hadn't done it. And we spend ages afterwards, I do, thinking about all the things I should have done or all the times I should have kept quiet and I didn't. So even while we reacting to that impulse of talking, of fighting back, there is that little voice inside us that whispers, this is not wise, don't do it. But we don't hear that voice. We only hear it afterwards. Judaism, the rabbi says, builds pauses into our lives, our daily prayer, our blessing, to give us time to reconsider our paths and to correct it the next time and to change our thinking and behavior. And to conclude, believe me, I'm going to, Rabbi Joshua Weinberg, a rabbi I've spent a lot of time with in Israel. He's in the States. He is the vice chair of the World Zionist Organization and heads up also the largest Jewish Zionist movement in the world. We call ours Otzenu, which only means those Jews who openly said, I'm a Zionist. As you know, they're Christian Zionists, and all it says is that we believe that the Jews have a right to their biblical land. And he equates Jacob. And of course, why is Israel named after Jacob, Yisrael? Because Israel is the heart of the struggle with themselves. As you can see, Baruch Hashem, we have got a coalition government with the most extreme Islamic party sitting there, and a previous, more right-wing government ousted. But it's not the ultimate answer. We still have many hills to climb. We have to defend ourselves as best as we can to prevent death from our enemies in the area. At the same time, we have to do our best to keep the collateral damage down. That is the essence of Judaism. And Josh shares this example, and it's been said to me as well. How can you be a left-wing and be a Zionist with what Israel does? And he was really, he didn't say anything, he kept quiet. And he realizes that to the world, anti-Zionist means being anti-Palestinian. And as I myself said in a broadcast the other day, I'm not anti-Palestinian. I am pro-Palestinian. And I'm just using this as an example. I'm pro-Israel. I'm pro-peace. That doesn't mean I'm a pacifist. No, that's also not an answer that I can choose, because we know that pacifism won't get us over this era of our generation. But what Josh says, let us explain that in terms of Judaism and being a Zionist, or in being a human being, that one can wrestle with the truth as you find it, that there is not only one answer, and that above all, as we stumble on, let us just wrestle and know that we are caring about ourselves, we are caring about our own people, and equally, we are caring about the people of a possible enemy. And looking at that point, which Hashem wants is for us to make peace, to find that common ground where everyone can live in peace and prosperity. Shabbat Shalom. Back